Do you know Casper Lee? Well, in case you don't, you should really check out his YouTube channel where he has millions and millions of subscribers who love the way that he lives and, well, the fun movies that he creates. So today's interview is about influencer marketing, and I've got the chance to speak to one of the biggest influencers in this world and, well, go deep for you into how you do influencer marketing in 2021 and especially how you measure success with influencer marketing. So, the stage is yours, guys. Let's hit it off. This is Influencer Marketing 2021 and how you measure it. What's up, Ed World, ladies and gentlemen? I'm super stoked about the upcoming panel. We're gonna learn about influence marketing from the pros. I'm here with Casper Lee, Ben Jeffries, and Emily Trineth, and this is gonna be amazing. I'm so stoked to have you guys with me here today. Well, let me briefly introduce who is here with me today. Casper has been named a Forbes 30 under 30, but why? He has, I believe, 18 million followers on YouTube. Is that true? Well, let's learn more about how you got there. Hello, Casper.
Hello, lovely to meet you. Not 18 million on YouTube, unfortunately, across social media, but I'd love to get to 18 million on YouTube one day.
How many is it? I think it's like 7 or 9. How much?
Nearly 7. You keep going really high, and now I have to kind of bring the expectations right down. But appreciate the optimism.
Well, that's amazing. I think I have 20K on LinkedIn. I'm almost.
That's huge. I love LinkedIn. LinkedIn's the future. That's awesome.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, let's talk about that later. We have a second amazing person here on our call, Ben Jeffries. He's the CEO of Influencer, a leading influence marketing company. He has been through several investment rounds. He's also been named the Forbes 30 under 30. Welcome on our virtual stage here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to talk more, both from a perspective of how we've been running campaigns for advertisers, but also working with our agency partners, such as MediaCom, who we've also got Emily on the panel with, and also from a creative perspective as well.
Fantastic. That's going to be very interesting. Super happy to have you here in our panel as well. Thank you, Ben. And last but certainly not least, I apologize actually. Typically, it's ladies first. I'm not British, bad manners. Emily, super happy to have you here with us on this panel and giving us an agency perspective, because Emily is actually leading influencer marketing for MediaCom. In case you don't know MediaCom, you better look it up. It's one of the leading agencies globally, and globally, she's also leading influence marketing for accounts like Coca-Cola. So she definitely knows a thing or two about how to deal with influence marketing on a large scale. Welcome, Emily.
Thank you, Philip. No pressure. I'm also the only one who's not in Forbes 30 under 30 yet.
No, me neither. I'm like 50 under 50, maybe.
Cool.
Well, again, guys, thank you so much for joining this virtual panel. Obviously, I would love to have you on a real stage. But we will make sure that this is equally amazing, and that whoever is watching this right now is gonna take a lot out of this conversation. So let's jump right into it. This panel is about influence marketing, obviously, and we're gonna dive specifically into how to measure the success of influencer marketing. We've seen over the last years, decade maybe, a lot of vanity metrics being thrown around. We've just talked about 6, 7, or 18 million followers. And that's awesome, right? Don't get me wrong. I wish I had that. But the question is, how do you actually measure that, and how do you make sure that you get the highest ROI from your influence marketing campaigns? But let's start off with an easier one, which is about channels, right? You guys do a lot of YouTube. I'm sure you also engage a lot on TikTok, right? We mentioned LinkedIn. There is Instagram. Which are the channels where you believe brands, companies, and also influencers should focus on in 2021 and beyond? Let's start off with Casper, please.
Yeah, so from a creative perspective, I think now is a really good time for people to start off growing an audience, because there was a time where it was really difficult with platforms like YouTube and Instagram, where kind of getting yourself out there was really tough because you were competing with people who had massive audiences already subscribed to them. Whereas now with TikTok and the way the algorithm works with Instagram and Reels and even YouTube to a point now, you no longer need to have subscribers to get noticed. People are served content they're not subscribed to. So to answer your question, I think it's really across the board. It depends, what kind of content you're making would help decide which platform you should be focusing on. But we see people growing massive numbers on TikTok right now, obviously. But then Reels is doing really well for some Instagrammers. If you really are consistent with your Reels, you can see some big growth on Instagram. Obviously, I just want to caveat that with don't repost your TikToks directly onto Reels because they don't like having the TikTok brand mark and they actually will devalue it in the algorithm. And then, as I said, again, YouTube is a super important place to grow an audience because that audience can engage a lot more with you and your content. And as I said earlier, people no longer just look at the subscriptions, they look at the homepage. So if the content you're creating has a high watch time, then even if you don't have a bunch of subscribers, you will see it being served out to the relevant audience.
Interesting. Thank you very much. First, golden nuggets right there. Ben, what's your take on this question?
Yeah, it's a really good question because I suppose for us at influencer.com, the way we run campaigns is we don't like to focus necessarily just on one social network because each different social network would have, I guess, certain benefits attached to it. One social network might be better at delivering a brand awareness campaign because the CPM is a lot cheaper, say TikTok at the moment. But then there might be another platform which is better at delivering views, or another platform better at delivering clicks, like Instagram. So we always tend to find that when we run campaigns at Influencer, that we do a multi-channel approach. To be honest, at present, I'd say 85% of our campaigns include an element of Instagram to them, because Instagram's also a great tool about pushing content towards other, parts of content, whether that be pushing people over to a YouTube video, or whether that be pushing content away to a TikTok channel, for example. So, for us, it's a multi-channel approach. Instagram is the main one, but we also have seen TikTok massively rising. I think, earlier this year, it was reported how TikTok also became the largest for average amount of time spent a day from a consumer. So again, that's something to take into consideration when you're running a campaign. But then again, there's YouTube where it's longer form content, where it might be better for an explainer style video or for delivering a stronger brand message. So it completely depends. But yeah, an effective campaign is using a multi-channel approach.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Ben. We're going to look into single channel and multi-channel later on in this conversation as well. So that's going to be very interesting. Well, Emily, what's your perspective on this? Obviously, you're working with a lot of large brands, and they might have, a particular flavor of where they want to be present or not. What's your take on the most important channels as of now?
Well, I mean, I'd really echo everything that Ben and Casper have said so far. I mean, Ben probably took the words straight out of my mouth. But I think we have seen influencer marketing in the last few years move away from a kind of siloed approach to a really holistic channel. And it used to be, is it Instagram versus YouTube? Is it TikTok versus Instagram? What's the next big thing in influencer marketing? And the truth is there's now this holistic space for all types of creators, all types of formats, all types of platforms. And it's just channeling what types of messages work best for that channel. And it's not about, taking that same creative and then slapping that across 10 different channels. It's about having a really clear strategy for each different channel and the purpose of the content. So like Ben was mentioning earlier, do you look at long form educational style content for YouTube? Do you look at blog posts for Pinterest if your product can be weaved into a kind of planning stage message? Are you looking at Instagram to drive conversions? How can you do that in a snappy way? Is it using Reels combined with longer form video? So it's really about having a strategy which is looking at all of the channels and then creating creating those formats and separate kind of campaign messages within that. And then it's testing and learning and seeing what works, you know. And I think the brands that have the most success in influencer marketing are the ones that aren't afraid to test out new things. And something that I'm really excited about is Clubhouse. So there's a lot of kind of speculation out there about Clubhouse, you know, how that could potentially work with influencer marketing. And they've recently announced that they're announcing a kind of creator program. So brands that start to test out platforms like Clubhouse really early on will start to get a feel for how it works and how it can drive best value for them.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess that's true, but also it's a lot of work. So I wonder how brands going to do that. I work with a lot of brands who are having troubles with one channel. So you're telling them that they have to work on several at the same time. Let's help them a little bit. And the last point that you mentioned was about the value. So my next question will be about how to actually measure the success, right? So let's look at the one, probably the most important metric, which is ROI, your return on investment, right? So I come from a hardcore performance world where we look at data a lot. And in the end, all that matters is, are you making a profit or not as a company, right? So obviously with influencer marketing, that's coming from a different space. Emily, let's continue with you. The brands that you work with, how much are they looking into KPIs like an ROI? Are they still looking into other metrics? What really counts for the larger companies that you work with?
Yeah, I mean, it's a mixed bag, to be honest. And, you know, we at MediaCom, so we look after sort of UK clients and worldwide clients. Majority of MediaCom's clients are the big kind of household names. So you mentioned Coca-Cola. We also have Sky. We have Mars. And so for those brands, it's actually a little bit more difficult for us, because how can we run a campaign for extra chewing gum and actually start to pull out insights as to how many people have seen a post which includes that pack of gum and then walked to a shop and actually gone and purchased, right? So we have that challenge versus those kind of D2C and challenger brands where they can directly silo the channel and actually attribute influencer to conversions. So I think the biggest thing, and I mentioned this before, is having this test and learn kind of framework to influencer marketing, because there's no one answer or solution as to how you can drive success in terms of ROI. It's really bespoke to every single brand and what your capabilities are. You know, so you need to kind of test and learn, figure out what works, and then double down on that to kind of really input into your strategy. So it's a bit of everything at the moment, a bit of a mixed bag. A lot of our clients are still looking at awareness and kind of using influencers to raise brand awareness. And I think that when you look at the funnel, you need to also see that you're not just going to plug into influencer marketing and start to receive sales on day one. You do need to have this kind of longer term approach. So start to raise brand awareness first, and then, you know, right the way through to consideration and then looking at conversion. So it really is a kind of longer term test and learn opportunity.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm sure it very much depends on the companies you work with. Ben, maybe you can dive into how you do it at Influencer, actually. So work with different channels and obviously working with a lot of different companies and influencers there as well. What's your approach to tracking in how to compare different channels?
Yeah, no, very good question. As Emily kind of alluded to, I suppose you split it into 3 different areas. So you're either running an awareness campaign, a consideration campaign, or a conversion campaign. And the strategies will be very different. And how you determine the success from a ROI perspective will obviously depend over which approach you're actually taking. Obviously, when you're on a conversion perspective, you know, measuring ROIs quite plain and simple, because you can see what sort of sales uplift, you can see what sort of clicks have actually occurred. It's, you know, it's pretty easy to actually be able to establish. You tend to find that when an influencer marketing campaign is focused around conversion, influencer marketing is brought into the marketing mix with a paid media approach. And you tend to see those working in unison, because that way they can drive, you know, the retargeting element, which is actually key to driving conversion. When it comes to consideration, this is where, you know, you can measure ROI mainly from multiple elements using like data science here. So we work with a number of research partners, whether that be IBM Watson, Relative Insight, 50 Technology, these parties to help understand brand uplift, because these can help understand, you know, has the conversation with the consumers started, you know, building up about the brand? what sort of, not just, what positive or negative sentiment is showing in the comments, but what are the comments actually saying? Are they showing a certain level of, purchase uplift or anything like that? So that's how you can sort of start to measure ROI from those elements. And that's through, as I mentioned, these deep thematic analysis. And obviously from the initial brand awareness uplift, again, it really depends. Is your main driver, to get a certain level of views? Is it to drive a certain level of impressions? Influencer marketing does seem to be moving away from that and much more towards consideration and conversion.
Interesting. Okay, thank you very much. That's awesome. Well, Casper, what's your approach here, both as part of influencer.com and the agency perspective, but also as an influencer yourself, and how you enjoy working actually with brands?
Yeah, so I think on this topic, I think what's changed so much with working with brands was previously they used to focus on how many subscribers I had or how many subscribers the creator has that they want to work with through influencer, or followers, and how many likes they get on a post. And they weren't really considering things like saves, shares, types of comments, the amount of clicks, and so on. So I think it's become really interesting because you're seeing these massive creators who maybe have millions of followers and even celebrities who don't have as good of an ROI as maybe a more niche creator who focuses on a particular type of product or service. And so it really means that when it comes to working with influencers, it's no longer just connecting a creator with a brand. It's about connecting the right audience of a creator accurately with the brand, and making sure that, like, viewing their past work with other brands and so on, that they're going to actually hit the ROI the brand's after. And you can't just kind of guess anymore. And it's evolved, and it's put a lot more pressure on creators to have a more meaningful relationship with their audience, and not just go for those massive numbers, but also think about how can they interact with them more, how can they get closer with them so that the audience is sharing their content, is commenting, is clicking, and so on. And I think that also lends itself well to the idea of what brand deals creators should be taking. They can't take any brand deal anymore, like maybe in the past, where because they had a massive following, any brand would be super excited to work with them. Now they have to be more considerate and take the brand deals that actually work for their audience. And that's when you really do see the best brand deals playing out, because an audience doesn't want to necessarily just watch you work with a random brand. They want to see you work with brands you truly care about. So I think kind of the evolution has almost improved the way people are organically. The evolution with ads has also improved the organic relationship between creators and their audiences.
Cool, definitely. Well, since you just mentioned ads, that's another thing. So obviously a lot of companies run, both influencer companies, but influencer marketing strategies, they have campaigns there, but they also run ads, right? And specifically for, well, traditionally, if that's something in our space, been YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, where a lot of ad budget has been spent as well. How do you see the relationship between organic campaigns through influencers and paid ads, and what to keep in mind to have them work in sync? Casper.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't such a big thing back in the day that brands would be after the reusage rights of your content. It was something that was brought up, but it was rarely used. And so now, as creators, you're not just seen as as a way of reaching an audience. You're also seen as someone who can create content, and that content can be used for your own audience, or it can be used for your audience and through advertisements, or it can be used just through paid ads. So you're seeing some really smart up and coming brands hiring influencers to create the content and post it as dark ads. So that's not even being posted to their audiences. So it's really kind of fascinating to see, and it almost means that when you're working with a creator, it's not just one product you're buying. You're buying the creative idea and the ability for them to make that creative idea work, and then you're buying separately their audience. But that doesn't necessarily mean you need to always buy both, depending on what you want to do with that content.
So are you saying that it's very typical to have different kind of deals depending on maybe also, well, the perspective of a brand towards influence marketing, how developed they are internally and how much they can also use it. And depending on that, it's all individual deals?
Yeah, there's deals vary so much still, and it's kind of our job at Influencer to help guide the brand to make the right decisions and not necessarily purchase kind of a product that they don't need from the influencer. So for example, if they are just after the influencer's audience, why do they necessarily need the reusage rights and pay for that as well? These are things you can always bolt on afterwards and so on when you see that you do like the content. But yeah, it is definitely becoming a world in which lawyers are making a lot more money because of these contracts that are so varied. And it's kind of fascinating to see where it's going to go and how it's going to become more standardized and how people are going to start speaking more of the same language, because everyone's kind of wanting different things from different campaigns because there's no kind of standard way of doing it, which is obviously exciting, but it also means every campaign is slightly different.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and I love following this space and see how it moves. I mean, a couple of years ago, I remember it was a big pain working with many of the influencers because, well, they're great at producing their content, but not necessarily experienced business people, right? Yeah. Well, maybe that's a good thing for influencer.com. Well, Ben, how do you deal with that? I assume you help influencers also like structure those deals so they can continue to focus on what they do best, which typically is content.
Absolutely, it's certainly a help. It's certainly to do with managing both sides of the coin. Usage, as Casper mentioned, is a big play within influencer marketing contracts. We still have quite a lot of brands who are like requesting, usage in perpetuity, and it's really like you actually need it in perpetuity. Because creators have a really big issue with that, because creators are like, I don't necessarily want to align myself with a brand now that a brand can use again in 10 years time when I'm a completely different person. I might have completely different beliefs. So it's for our job to educate both the creators over what's fair and also educate the brands over what the norm is as well. So, usage plays one part to it, but in terms of, the time between organic and paid, as sort of alluded to earlier, it's becoming one of the same. I'd now say, well, certainly the majority of our campaigns at influencer.com include an element of paid media attached to it. That's partly because, the CPM is actually much cheaper on a paid level, but that's because, you're retargeting certain audiences than it is for just, and because it's a pure media buy, rather than necessarily when you're paying for an influencer piece of content, you're paying for the content to be produced, you're paying for the name association factor as well as the media buy. So there's multiple different elements. That's why the CPM is cheaper on paid. But it's not just about the time between influencer marketing as an organic channel and influencer marketing from a paid media channel. There's, influencer marketing fits really well across the rest of the marketing mix. And one thing which we really like to tell our clients is, we would never push our clients to say, look, spend 100% of your media budget on influencer marketing. That'd be ludicrous. We say, influencer marketing goes really nicely with TV. It goes really nicely with your website ads. We actually did a study with Global Web Index back in July last year, where 3 of the top 10 ways which consumers discover brands were from social media. But obviously there's 7 other ways which people can discover brands from. So it's important to be using the strength of influencer marketing in those other forms. And, we're starting to see it more and more, for example, in influencer marketing assets being used for out-of-home advertising. So that's really where the industry is going. And it's great because it's, I guess it's tying it in, as I said, with the wider marketing mix.
Absolutely. Fascinating. Well, Emily, can you share a little bit about how your clients, bigger brands, actually deal with that?
Yeah, I think, well, it starts from the kind of planning phase, right? And this is where MediaCom has such a large amount of value. And something that we've seen from our clients is that they're consolidating a lot of their influencer activations and handing a lot of it over to us, because we've got the ability to, see the full kind of bigger picture of what's going on across their wider media campaigns, from a TV standpoint, from an outdoor standpoint, digital display, paid social, you name it. And so what we've got the ability to do is kind of bring influencer marketing away from this kind of siloed one-off approach, which it has been to date, it's usually been viewed as a kind of nice to have and a cherry on top. It's now actually shifted. And I think that, since sort of the pandemic and everything that's happened last year, a lot of advertisers have seen that, influencer marketing is a really valid channel and really needs to be prioritized. So we've seen influencer marketing kind of shift and move towards the kind of core of the campaign activity that we run. And so for us and for me and my team, we work alongside the MediaCom account teams to actually bring influencers into the core of the mix. So we can actually integrate influencer campaigns alongside, a TV activation and outdoor, and paid social was a big part of that as well. So we work really closely with our specialist paid social teams. And we basically integrate the influencer campaign with our paid plan. So we start to identify, where can we amplify the influencer content directly from the influencer posts, which Ben and Casper have talked about a lot already. But then we also look at, where can we lift that creative and use it in brand assets? And then how do we actually test which is performing best? And I think that testing opportunity on the kind of back end is the really important part, because then that's where we can start to look at really tangible results that we can replicate.
Okay, so I have one more question for all those people in the audience who may not actually have the budget or the internal resources to run across all the different channels, right? And might not even have the budget to go with a pro like MediaCom. The question is, if you are, let's say, an up-and-coming e-commerce direct-to-consumer brand, right? Just as a concrete example, how would you approach influencer marketing, the different channels, the ROI, how would you measure it? Let's go all across the board, as brief as possible. And let's start with Ben.
Of course. So I think something like influencer marketing, it's really important to understand what it actually is, right? So influencer marketing is essentially word of mouth, but it's now on social media. So it's important to start getting scale when you're running an influencer marketing campaign. So it is something that, if you've only got, say, a few £1,000 budget to not actually spend on influencer marketing, I'd actually spend it purely on paid media or paid social. I would spend, only start getting into influencer marketing when you're ready to start off a conversation by, when you're at the budget levels of at least £40,000 or $40,000. The interesting thing with influencer marketing is you can actually do it free as well, if you're willing to really, really hustle. So for the entrepreneurs out there who, are thinking, oh my God, that, those numbers, those £40,000 figure seems out of depth. If you're willing to be able to, send a lot of DMs out to creators, build relationships with the creators, you can do it free, but it will take a lot of work. It'll take a lot of time. But, that is another route you can do. Or as another route with influencer marketing, which is becoming more prominent, is bringing creators into like the founder story, so to speak, which I know Casper can obviously talk about with great experience.
Yeah, I mean, I can add on to that. Yeah, there's some, and I wouldn't call them kind of small companies anymore, but there's some startups in the UK like Wild Deodorants and Dashwater, who were very hands-on with their creators from an early stage, and they actually reached out to a club I have called the Creative Investment Club, and we're a group of creators who invest in startups together. And because we were allowed in and we built a really meaningful relationship with them, we had a very organic relationship with those brands that maybe when they were getting started, didn't want to spend massive amounts on a big campaign. That said, you've got to be careful when you're doing it kind of that organically. You're never going to get the same level of standard from the creators unless you have a really, really good relationship like we did with Wild and Dash. You're not going to necessarily get them to stick to your brand messaging, be kind of liable for what they're saying, which is also super important these days when it comes to brand safety. And especially for a new brand going out there, you've got to be very careful not to kind of piggyback just on one creator. Obviously, there are some brands that do, and it can be great and can be very successful, but it can also be dangerous at times. So yeah, there's a number of things to think about, but I think Ben highlighted that there are ways to kind of hustle and get things done without a massive budget.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what I've seen quite a lot as well is that with micro influencers, it might work better, right? I mean, you typically have your barter trades, and you give influencers something for free, and that might work until a certain level, but obviously it doesn't work for working with the macro influencers, the bigger guys. So that's a different story then. So maybe that's another point of differentiation for everyone who doesn't have the budget yet. So Emily, how do you get people ready to actually work with MediaCom? So what tips do you have for the guys who don't want to spend the 40 to 400K on the larger campaigns yet?
Well, we do have a startup program, so we do consult with some startups. So we're not just for the big clients, but I think, I mean, prior to MediaCom, I worked in tech startups in the influencer space. So I'm quite used to kind of working with smaller budgets and startup brands. And I think the biggest thing to look at initially is who do you have within your network already that you can tap into, whether that's amongst your kind of family and friends, or your own customers. And essentially the most authentic, I hate to say that word, but it wouldn't be an influencer marketing panel without saying that word. The most authentic and impactful campaigns are really when there is a true alignment between an influencer and a brand. And, how powerful is it, for someone who's already been using your product for X amount of time to then be able to kind of share that. And I think you've got to get smart in that kind of hustling mentality where you just start to not look at like who's got millions of followers. Someone's got 200 followers or 500 followers. There's still people within that they can influence. So it's empowering your own customers to be able to share content about your brand. I think the really clever brands, obviously it's a big question because it could be anything, but the really clever brands build their brand so it is Instagrammable, right? So, you look at the Glossiers of the world, you look at, the Gymsharks, even when you look at, when you go to cafes and hair salons, in the UK, they've all got these kind of incredible Instagrammable setups, with little cards to say, tag us. And I think that's really where the world is moving towards. It's creating that kind of shareable experience where you don't necessarily need to invest loads in paying people. But if you do decide to pay influencers, I would say test a really small amount, find good creators who align with your mission and your values, test out with a really small amount of budget, start to look at different types of creative and different types of platforms and see what works best for you as a brand, because there are so many variables in influencer marketing. And I think that's probably the biggest reason as to why ROI is really hard for us to kind of pin down on from an industry perspective, because it's just there are so many variables and different types of creative out there. So again, it's back to that kind of test and learn mentality and seeing what works best for you as a brand.
Absolutely. Well, I've got a last question. Unfortunately, we're almost out of time, but one that taps into the one word that you just mentioned, which is authenticity, right? It was an overused word, obviously, but I want to use it to ask about trust, right? I mean, call it authenticity, call it creation of trust, but call it how to connect with your followership. In one way or another, you want to build that connection. You want to make sure that it's real. And that is specifically true, I believe, for the younger generation. So I'm definitely the oldest guy here. I'm a LinkedIn kind of person, right? I have no idea what you guys are actually doing with the cameras. Yeah, I run out of battery when I try to use mine. But help me understand, how do you build that trust with a younger audience that is more and more skeptical when it comes to sponsored content, who I believe tend to not appreciate ads. I mean, nobody does, but younger people specifically try to avoid them. How do you work around that? And how can you still make an influencer business model work? Let's start with Casper again.
Yeah, so with influencer marketing, that there isn't a workaround to kind of make an ad not appear as an ad. And I think that's one of the brilliant things about our industry is the level of disclosure that there has to be. Obviously, there are people who haven't kept to that level of disclosure in the past, but it is something that people are doing more and more. So I would never use that approach to try and convince someone that it's not an ad. What I would rather do is is get creators to work with brands that their audiences know they're excited about working with. And that's something that an audience, and as you said, a younger audience can really see quite quickly whether or not it is, the word authentic is being used again by myself, I do apologize, but they can see pretty quickly if the person that they follow and they trust truly does appreciate and care about the brand that they're working with.
Yeah.
And that's based on the content they've made in the past, what they've spoken about in the past, what they've done for free about the brand potentially in the past as well. And is it a product that they really use themselves and so on. And then additionally on that, can they make the content really interesting? Because that's something I think is sometimes forgotten in these brand deals and campaigns when it comes to ads. Like, sometimes people are thinking, how can we, how can we sell? How can we do this? But at the end of the day, how can we make it so that people want to watch the entire advert? And a good point here is watch time, and that's something you should always think about when you're working with a creator. Is if you kind of just throw in the advert and make it a really strong sell from the start, then the chances are people aren't going to enjoy the advert as much. But if it's a really interesting creative, and maybe that the brand is providing the creator with an opportunity to do something very exciting and the audience wants to see that, then they're going to watch the whole way through. And then what happens is that ad's not only going to be served to the hardcore fans who see all of the content by the creator, but it will also be served to their wider audience and then potentially go beyond their audience as well. So those are a few points that I feel very passionate about.
Yeah, I can see that. That's awesome. Cool. Thanks for sharing that. That's amazing. Emily, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think, it goes back to selecting the right influencers for your brand, and then working with them to kind of co-create this really sort of relevant creative that's demonstrating how your brand is impacting that person's life in a really positive way. And, as followers of influencers and creators, you're literally following their lives, so it's no longer this kind of one-off, here's me in a product, Kardashian style, content with skinny tees. It's actually looking at how do we create a longer form kind of content series where you can demonstrate the value of that product across multiple different ways and across a period of time as well. So if it is going to be something that's health related, how is someone testing that out across 1 or 2 months, and what are the benefits they're seeing at the end of it? And so it's sort of playing the long game in a way, in the sense of you really need to embed that product and tell a story essentially, and that's really where you start to see the kind of the most trustworthy and believable content, because it's true. And that's the thing, you can't dupe people anymore with influencer marketing. So it really has to be kind of selecting those right creators, understanding their audience and what their audience is used to, and then relying on the creators to be able to give that input in terms of what that content story looks like and how that's going to add value to their audience.
Thank you very much. Well, last but not least, Ben, what do you recommend companies if they want to be authentic, just because you love that word?
Yeah, I mean, I think Casper and Emily highlighting the 3 bits, right? It's when you're building that meaningful relationship between the creator and the brand, when you're selecting, which creators to work with, you look at it not just from what the science is saying, which is, the actual data behind the creator, but also the synergy. Does the creator match those, the company values and the ethos of the brand? And then, of course, there's also the style, as Casper alluded to and Emily alluded to, in terms of the content series. Can you build out something together which has that deeper, longer-term partnership? It's actually quite interesting. In a lot of the contracts that we're now signing with brands, they're asking for us to actually include an estimation over what the positive sentiment actually is going to be from the campaign. Obviously, it's only an estimation at this stage, but when estimates start getting put into contracts, it means that it's going to be a certain amount of time before that turns into a guarantee. So it shows now that brands are thinking about it from their how are the consumers actually interpreting the content that the creator's producing in partnership with that brand. So it's important that for brands who are just dipping their toes into influencer marketing, that they're not just saying what they think their brand perception is, but it's what consumers are seeing as the brand perception actually is.
Perfect. well, my perception is that influencer marketing is going to get even bigger over the next years to come. So thank you very much for sharing a little bit about how it works for you guys right now and what to keep in mind in 2021. It was a great pleasure. Looking forward to stay in touch with you guys. Thank you very much for joining us for AdWorld, and well, keep rocking.